Welcome to another episode of the CompileSwift podcast. This is a sort of a special edition here. There's actually a video version of this podcast that accompanies it. You don't have to go see the video. Everything is covered in the audio version. But we are going to be talking about differences between Xcode 10.3 and Xcode 11.3, for the perspective of those that are moving from one to the other. So you may benefit from watching the video. I'll include a link in the show notes, and I will also include it in the post for this episode on CompileSwift.com. So please feel free to watch either one. Like I say, you may benefit from watching the video, but everything that I talk about will make just as much sense in the audio version. So this episode came about because my team and I finally decided for our production projects to move from Xcode 10 to Xcode 11. And part of the reason for that was because we wanted to start working on supporting iOS 13. Well, along the way, we hit some snags, some rather unexpected snags, and they caused us some problems that we had to work around and caused us a few little issues that caused a lot more trouble than you would think. So I thought to myself, we'll go ahead and share some of the things that I discovered in some tips here. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first tip is the code signing. In Xcode 10, you would normally expect to click on your project, and then you would click on your targets, and you would find the signing right there on the General tab, where you choose your provisioning profile, your team, deployment targets, and all that kind of thing. Well, in Xcode 11, it's not there. If you go and click on your project and then choose a target, you're going to notice that it's missing. Okay, each of the sections goes straight from, instead of going identity, signing, and deployment info, it now goes identity and deployment info. However, if you look at the row above, which is sort of the invisible tabs, you'll see in Xcode 11 there is one called Signing and Capabilities. And if you click on there, you're going to get that signing portion of the screen that you're used to seeing those options on in Xcode 10. And same thing in there, you can put your team, your bundle identifier, check your provisioning profiles and signing certificates. So, again, you just click on each of the targets and you go ahead and pick one. So that's where that exists. Just look for that Signing and Capabilities tab across the top there. That kind of invisible tab of menu that runs across the screen there. So that's tip. Tip number 2 is something related to source control. Now, of course, Xcode has had support for Git for a little while now. If you have a storyboard open in Xcode, what you can do is if you open up, you can go to the tab in the inspector and, look at the source control. And it used to show you branches, tags, and remotes. Well, one of the new ones in Xcode 11 is it will now show you stashed changes as well. So that's nice. You can just click on there, see what's in a stash, and work with it there. But they also took it one step further. And if you go back and you look at, say, a file, in Xcode 11, what you can do is there's an extra inspector now. So if you go in and you open up your inspector panel, you'll find there's a new tab that has the file history. It's actually called the History Inspector. And any file that you click on, you can see the source control Git history right there on the right-hand side. And you'll see the commit details along with the sort of the first line of the commit note. You can click on each of the commits and it'll tell you, some extra details. You can tell it to show you the commit. You can open it for a code review. And you can also click a link to open up and automatically create and send, or at least automatically open up for you to fill in an email to email the person that made the commit on that file if you have any questions or things like that. So it's nice. Personally, I still don't use source control in Xcode that much. I have a third-party client software that I prefer to use. So shout out to Tower App, which is git-tower.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. That's still my favorite app for source control. They do a phenomenal job, and I just find it so much easier to work with. Although the source control in Xcode is getting better. So that's tip number 3 is one that's not going to be immediately obvious to you, but it's actually something that's going to catch you out once you start to try to do builds and distribute them in, test flight or somewhere else. And what it is actually something that's not even directly in Xcode. You'll need to go over to the Apple developer portal for. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here. and it's just this, right? If you go to the certificates, identifiers, and profiles, you may find that you're wondering, it's like, well, suddenly you can't, build and run and sign your applications. And the reason being, I noticed, is right here. See how it generates this extra certificate for use in Xcode 11 or later. So if you're going to, be doing this, you're going to have to go in here and probably go in and check, including these are the previous ones, but you're going to have this new one for Xcode 11 that you will have to go in and explicitly check this and save it to generate these new profiles and download those in Xcode. That was one that it took a little while for me to find and was a bit of a pain because I couldn't figure out why I'd been able to sign these things all along, and now I was getting invalid profiles. And I don't know the reason. Maybe there's a thing out there from Apple explaining it, but there is now specifically Xcode 11 and later this new one that gets generated that you're going to need to include. So, definitely make sure you check that out. Look in the developer profiles and portals for that. So that's tip number. Tip number 4 is for anyone that uses third-party libraries and frameworks. Now, in my application here, in fact, I would safely say probably all the applications that I've worked on, I use CocoaPods. So I have lots of pods and I do the pod install, and I'm sure that's very familiar to many of you. Well, in Xcode 11 now, you can actually go ahead and start using the Swift Package Manager, which is something that's existed before, but it's always been either from the command line or not a very integrated experience. But now with Xcode 11, it's right there in Xcode, so I would expect that this is probably going to get a push going forward. And if you're interested in using the Swift Package Manager, it's very straightforward. All you need to do is go up to File, and then you just go to Swift Packages, and you can just add a package dependency right there. And a drop-down is going to appear in Xcode 11. You select your project, you just hit Next, and from there it's going to give you a list of basically GitHub-based packages. Okay, so I've got a list that I, follow on GitHub, and those appear for me, but you can go ahead and start searching. So you might do something like, SwiftLint or something like that, and from there basically you can go ahead and search for a repository, and then when you find the one you want, you can just select it, you go next and integrate it that way. So it's nice that it's now built in to Xcode, and it makes the management a lot easier as well. So that's something that you may be interested in playing around with. It is something that I'm going to take a look at over time. I'm not necessarily going to move my projects over to using Swift Package Manager, but it is certainly something that I, clearly in the future is going to be a thing. So I feel that it's important to sort of jump on the bandwagon and at least be familiar with it. So that's tip number. Tip number 5 is one that has caused a lot of problems for my team, and we know how to deal with it now and work with it, but it's a real pain, and it was a gotcha that we were not expecting. But when we analyzed it after the problem and sat down and discussed it, it was kind of obvious to us, like, that basically this was a thing that, could have got us, right? So you may, obviously be aware at this point that iOS 13 has a dark mode, and dark mode is supported in Xcode 11. Well, the funny gotcha is that if you obviously do builds for your application in in Xcode 10, well, Xcode 10 doesn't know about iOS 13, so there is no dark mode support. So when you do builds, you don't have to worry about dark mode and anything related to that. And if you loaded the application up onto a device that supports dark mode, it's just naturally going to work in the normal quote-unquote light mode for you under iOS 13, so it's not a problem. The problem becomes that if you then take that same code base and you build it in Xcode 11, which supports Swift 13, the problem now becomes you're going to get this dark mode that comes along with it. But of course, you don't have any dark mode support. So what happens? Well, this is one you may definitely want to check out the video for, because what we experienced was that if you have controls where you have set your own, the look of those controllers and color and everything else, it's not a problem. It's going to work in light mode just as you expect, and if you switch the device to dark mode, it's still going to show the light mode. But the problem happens if you have something that doesn't have dark mode support that you've accounted for. And I'm actually going to show this in the video version now, but I'll describe it as it goes. So let's take a text field, for example, okay, and you've got no dark mode support in there that you've built in. So you go ahead, you add the text field to the screen, and you may put in some prompt text, something like that, and everything's fine. Everything looks great in sort of this normal light mode, right? Well, I'm gonna add some text just to show the problem. So I'm just gonna text in here. So now I've got this control that looks fantastic and perfectly normal in light mode. But in Xcode 11, of course, you can actually go ahead and you can set the interface style to dark mode, or they call it dark style. Now, when I do that, the problem is that I've now, the controls that I've overridden the look for, they're going to look like they should in light mode still, but the ones that I haven't done anything to, like this text field that I just added, it's going to show in dark mode. So you're going to have this weird problem where you're going to have controls that won't render properly, and you may not even see the content for because you didn't put any overrides in there and you didn't support anything for dark mode. So what happens is dark mode comes along and says, okay, well then in that case I'm going to help the app out and I'm going to show the default dark mode look for that component based on Swift 13. Well, ordinarily that would be fine, except my app doesn't support dark mode. So the problem I have is I've now got this one or more controls with this dark mode look, and everything else is in light mode. And it's, obviously looks very strange to the user, doesn't look very nice from a design standpoint. But in Xcode 10, if I took that same code and rendered it, everything would be fine because it doesn't know what dark mode is. So, it's going to look just normal again in light mode. So just watch out for that, because you will have to provide, if you override some of the controls and not the others, you're going to get the default dark mode look, and that could cause you problems. You may have text fields that to the user will appear completely empty because your text is in black, for example. Well, in dark mode, it's going to have a black background. So now you've got black text on black background, and the user's going to think the app's not working properly. So that's just something to watch out for in dark mode. That's a gotcha that you're going to have to account for until you build in dark mode support. So that's tip number 5. So I hope these tips have been helpful. Certainly they have been a learning experience for me, and I'm sure for many others. And there may be some of you out there that have struggled with these and not known what's going on. So hopefully this video is going to help you. If the video and the podcast have been helpful to you, please like and subscribe on the various platforms of choice that you're using, and share them with other developers, because, that's part of being the wonderful Swift community, is that we all share things with each other. And it certainly helps me out, to spread the word for CompileSwift. If you find it helpful, you can follow me on Twitter and provide me feedback. You can just @CompileSwift. You can, of course, go to compileswift.com/contact to contact me as well. Reviews and ratings in platforms, the podcast platform of your choice, is always appreciated. Thank you for that, along with all your feedback. I always love getting the feedback from you all, and I always take the time to reply because you were so generous with your time to contact me in the first place. If you have any questions or anything, please reach out. I would love to discuss them with you. And with that, I will catch you next time around.